Thinking Out Loud, episode 2. Now, if you have a look at those ants over there, they're definitely not lazy physically, but we don't know what their senses are like, right? And think about this. We have an idea, we have an understanding of what it means to be lazy in action, not wanting to do things, being sort of lethargic, having that barrier to entry being so high that, I'd rather not do anything because doing something seems like such a strong effort inside. Going from that place of being, in a sense, sort of like collapsed on a sofa to doing something that has a large barrier to entry psychologically. And that, I think, is the main aspect of actional laziness. But what about perceptual laziness? Well, what is that? How can vision, for example, be lazy? Well, a good example of this, or at least how to start feeling into this, is by using pinhole glasses. Pinhole glasses, what they do is that they allow less light in, you see? And they have this effect of actually enhancing vision after a while when you've been using it, but also they relax the eyes. And as I use the pinhole glasses, I can feel my eyes working very differently. I can feel them being much more active, even though there is, in a sense, less sensory information coming in. And when I take off the pinhole glasses, it's almost as if, my eyes, my vision get just overwhelmed by suddenly this cascade of visual information, just like an avalanche of vision coming into my brain. And it feels like it's hard to process. It's like, there's so much of this, I can't, and then vision sort of collapses. And I'm talking about, subtly feeling into how I feel in my body in relation to vision, right? And this is possible only because of Vipassana and actually learning how to feel into what my body is sensing, how I am sensing my how my sensory input is being, in a sense, translated in my body, or how I perceive it in my body. But what does it mean for senses to be lazy? Perceptual laziness. One aspect of this is just looking at something, if we're still talking about vision, looking at something like, this anthill and saying, hey, this is an anthill. Just staying with that label and not really looking into this specific anthill. What is this? Not looking at what is this really? What are the actual properties of this object? And simply saying, anthill, and staying in that abstractness, not going into concreteness. That's one example of perceptual laziness, which we do all the time, and this is very useful if done consciously, because the brain needs to, and the mind needs to figure out the relationship of how much can I abstract and how much do I need to stay in contact with the actual concrete reality, the concrete objects that are in front of me. But this goes a level deeper as well when we're talking about developmental trauma especially, and aspects of the psyche that have splintered off and fallen into, let's say, the unconscious, fallen into the crazy logic realm of non-embodiment. It's sort of like when you have a cast around your leg for a few months, then after you start using your leg again, you will have already gone into a action pattern of not using that leg because you couldn't use it, right? You couldn't use that part of your physical body, so you learned another habit of using your body. And it's the same way with the senses. I mean, the psyche and the senses are intimately intertwined. So if an aspect of the psyche gets splintered off, gets disassociated, then an aspect of the physical senses gets disassociated, gets sort of disconnected, gets discombobulated in some sense. And I can't really put my finger on how this actually happens, but I'm guessing it's due to the fact that we have one brain for processing many different systems in our being, the senses, the body, the psyche, and so on, that they all sort of intermingle and interlap. And when at an early age in developmental trauma, an aspect of the psyche gets splintered off, then an aspect of the sense, of some sense, or the senses, gets splintered off. And due to this inability to use some part of, vision or some part of hearing, this sounds weird, right? But there comes this perceptual laziness, this perceptual, let's say, disability, perceptual disability, which in a sense is exactly what narcissism is. If you look at a narcissistic person or have ever experienced one directly, then you see a person who is not able to sense another person at all. It's like that other person doesn't exist. And psychologically, this requires some funky action inside, but the basic perception is that I am subject and others are objects. There is no subjectivity outside. And this requires some disability of the senses, right? This requires me to actually cut off that aspect of subjectivity that is in the other. It requires me to be perceptually and psychologically disabled. Yeah. So this was Thinking Out Loud, episode number 2.